Vietnam. From the air, it's breathtaking. On the ground, it's a hell of a place to fight a war. In this kind of country, in this kind of war, there had to be new solutions for the age-old problem of putting the fighting men where the fighting is and getting him out again. For this job, the military looked to a machine that had now come of age. For a generation of Americans, the image of a helicopter landing at a jungle LZ can only mean one thing: Vietnam. The helicopter so dominated American operations that the conflict has been rightly called the Helicopter War. The enemy had a nickname for the airships too: Muttering Death. As the helicopter matured during that conflict, it began to contribute to tactical operations in a way undreamed of in previous wars. Helicopters did yeoman service in every role imaginable, as transports, gunships, airborne ambulances, and search and rescue vehicles. The crews that flew these machines saw the war up close and personal. This is the story of those men, as told by a few of the thousands who shaped the war with heroic acts performed daily as a matter of routine in the course of just doing their job. This is the story of heroes and helicopters. The backbone of the Army's prosecution of the war was officially termed the Bell UH-1 Iroquois, but it was known universally as the Huey. Introduced in 1959 as an air ambulance, the Huey's true potential as a troop carrier was soon recognized. What set it apart from earlier helicopters was its power plant, the T-53 jet turbine. Simple, reliable, and packing more horsepower per pound than reciprocating engines, the T-53 gave the Huey speed, range, and dependability far beyond that of its predecessors. The Huey ushered in the era of air mobility.
The UH-1, which was the primary helicopter that was used in Vietnam, was an all-purpose vehicle. It was designed originally in the late 50s or early 60s to transport wounded. But it was just a fortuitous design that once it was put in service, that it was found to have much greater application than simply carrying litter patients. It was designed to carry 6 litter patients. But it was found to have almost universal application as a troop carrier, as a gunship. It was an extremely effective gunship. One of the reasons that it was so effective as a gunship was because of its slow speed. Now, that may sound surprising, but its slow speed on a gun run enabled it to deliver more ordnance on the target, simply because it was flying slower, and therefore could be shooting longer. It also enabled it to get very close to the ground. I mean, there were times when gunships were firing within 10 meters of friendly troops.
If you compare a person in the South Pacific during World War II that was there for 4 years, they spent about 40 days in combat. In Vietnam, in 1 year, the average infantryman spent 240 days in combat, and the difference was a helicopter. And the way that worked was that we would pick people up out of a firefight and take them a few miles away or several miles away and drop them right into another firefight.
The role of the helicopter completely changed the face of the war, because no longer did you have the problem of trucks necessarily, because transportation now for the troops was by air, and 99% of the time it was by helicopter. Anything anyone ever needed was delivered by helicopter. People were picked up by helicopter. Medevacs were made by helicopter. So they didn't have the long wait between battles that they had to engage in. The helicopter pilot was a, well, very unique person. You know, most of us were underpaid, overtrained, and too young really at the time to question what we were doing. But one thing I think stood out among the helicopter pilots, we all loved to fly.
The men who flew these versatile machines were a breed apart. The speed and complexity of modern jet fighters had forced aircraft designers to automate and computerize many flying skills that were once practiced by the seat of the pants, turning the pilots of these planes into engineers as much as pilots, relegating the man in the cockpit to the role of weapons systems manager and removing him far from actual combat. The mantle of the wandering knight of combat passed to a new generation of pilots. Unaided by computer-assisted aircraft control systems, the helicopter pilot harked back to the earlier breed of combat flyer who navigated by dead reckoning when he had to and met the enemy virtually face to face. As the role of the helicopter increased in importance, so did the need for pilots. Pilot training began at Fort Walters, Texas, just outside the town of Mineral Wells. Here, the student pilots earned their wings, flying sturdy and long-suffering OH-13s. For most of the new flyers, graduation day at Fort Walters only meant more schooling at the Huey School in Fort Rutger, Alabama. It was here that they learned the rudiments of their new profession, flying a helicopter in combat. For these men harbored no illusions about their destination after schooling was over.
There were a couple of things that differentiated us. I think the biggest is we were all volunteers. Nobody was ever forced to go to flight school. Now, certainly there were those of us who were there were people in flight school who knew that they had a choice of, or they had to be in the Army, and they looked around at the choices and decided if they had to be in the Army, they wanted to be pilots, and they volunteered for it. But I think the fact that and of course, everybody who volunteered for flight school knew we were going to Vietnam. I think 98, maybe 99% of the pilots who graduated from flight school in the mid to late 60s, early 70s went to Vietnam.
The relatively new doctrine of air mobility required military planners to develop new tactics to exploit the potential offered by the helicopter, the combat air assault. Combining old and new tactical strategies in novel ways, this new kind of combat assault depended on mutual support, combined forces, and close coordination.
We would get obviously briefed. There would be a mission that would come down that would tell us what we're supposed to do, where we're supposed to go, what the overall goals of the mission were. From the pilot's aspect of it is to pick up people at one point and take them to another, to insert them into a place, hopefully that wasn't actively hostile. Our role as gunship pilots escorting these troop ships was to protect them from any ground fire as best we could. Depending on the area, a lot of times it would be what they call preparation of the landing zone in the form of artillery fire from obviously U.S. controlled weapons. There might be an airstrike from the Air Force, and to soften the area up and just to kind of discourage anybody from being close where we were going to land. The next thing would be for the flight to approach the landing zone, and we would normally prep the landing zone by shooting rockets and machine gun fire into any place that somebody might be hiding or someplace that would give them concealment, and to try and draw fire, and also just to see if there was anybody in there. If we started drawing fire, then we would turn the flight out and they'd reevaluate the situation. But what would happen quite often is, of course, the VC or the Viet Cong or the North Vietnamese regulars would know what the game was. They'd seen this before. So they would wait until the ships got on the ground and they'd start shooting at them.
The new techniques gave rise to a new kind of unit that integrated all the elements needed for air assault campaigns into a single combat unit, the Air Cavalry.
Each troop, which was about company size, but in the cavalry, you've seen these guys run around with the cavalry hats on. A lot of cavalry traditions. Each cav troop had the scout platoon, which was the Little Birds Scouts. Up north, we had Hughes 500s, what they were called at the time. OH-6s. Had a gun platoon. We had AH-1G Cobras, and then a lift platoon, which was the UH-1H Hueys. Also, different than most of the other operations, was we also had a platoon of infantry. We called the Aero Rifle Platoon. So you can see we had all the elements to do a reconnaissance out at the periphery of where the division was. In this case, 101st Airborne Division AO was the DMZ Quezon Ashaw Valley up in northern I Corps. We had all the elements that we needed to go out front and look for the enemy. And then if we found them, find them and fix them in place. And if we needed to, then we could bring in our own infantry, either as blocking force or to go do reconnaissance on the ground.
The mission of finding and fixing the enemy fell to the scouts. Flying Dragonfly-like OH-13s, they called 13s, scout teams went low and slow, looking for signs of enemy activity.
You could fly observation helicopters, and those guys would fly very, very low, like on the trees, under the trees, just above the trees, at some very, very low speeds, okay? 10, sometimes even hovering speeds, 10 miles an hour. So you can see. Now, can somebody hide from that individual? Sure, okay? Can that individual miss big things even? Sure, okay? Can you see little things even? Sometimes. Those people got very, 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 very skilled at the place where they could follow trails, and so they could cover in 15 minutes sometimes what would take a ground unit, maybe even a half a day, with far less security, less risk than everything else.
Vernon Shepard was an observer on a scout team based in the Central Highlands.
We were like sitting ducks. We went out to try to draw fire, and we flew at treetop level. And the unit that I was in, we flew two-man in the Loach helicopter. We had a pilot and an observer, and basically we were just out on recon missions. And if we did encounter the enemy, then we always had the firepower that was above us. We always had a Cobra team, and we also had the infantry also that hovered above. That was kind of stacked in levels.
This was risky business, and the crews paid the price. They had the highest casualty rates of all helicopter pilots. Vernon Shepard was shot down on a scouting mission and taken prisoner by the Viet Cong.
It was a situation there where you didn't know if you were going to wake up the next day or not, because we were held in a jungle camp, which was different than the Hanoi Hilton. This was just like a makeshift POW camp that was out in the jungle. And throughout the time that we were held, a lot of events happened that we didn't know if they were just going to do us in right there and just bury us where nobody would have ever found us. It could have been easy for them to do that. But we weren't treated in a bad manner, but we were treated in a manner that they would treat themselves as far as their living conditions, the food they ate, just the living conditions were, well, I lived in a hole in the ground is what it was, and that's what they lived in also. But I didn't know, I come to respect the enemy a lot more. The way that they lived and the things that they had to go through. And they were a real dedicated, they were a lot different than the South Vietnamese soldier, a world of difference. Fortunately, we were only held for 38 days. And a lot of things transpired within that 38 days that brought us up to this point of release. It would take me hours to explain this to you, but we were held by the National Liberation Forces, and they tell us that they let us go for humanitarian reasons, and it was sort of like their anniversary also, and they thought it would be a good gesture on their part if they would let us go.
Above the scouts, gunships flew cover to protect the scouts and attack any enemy they uncovered. In its gunship configuration, the adaptable Huey was fitted with a variety of weapons, including the XM-157 rocket launcher with 2.7-inch aerial artillery rockets, the M16 armament subsystem with 2 M60 machine guns, and the M5 40mm grenade launcher.
It was kind of a get what you can type situation with most of the units. The majority of the units you had your issued weapon systems, and everybody modified the weapon systems to suit their own needs. And if you had commanders that were willing to let you modify that weapon system to get the job done and to do what then you were able to do okay, and you were able to carry more firepower than the original. I know the 40mm grenade launcher, for example, the box that it was designed for, it would only carry 150, I think, or 175 rounds of ammo. We never used the stock box, so I don't remember anymore how much they carried, but it was a very small amount. And by the time we got done with ours, we carried 750 rounds. So you could just barely get it off the ground, but you know, you were able to go and get the job done, and that's what it all came about. And we eventually took our miniguns off the pylons of the ship, and we adapted them to the doors for the gunner and crew chief, or for the crew chief fired the minigun, and we hung a minigun on one side, and we put dual-mounted M60 machine guns on the other side. And that increased our firepower because we found that our crew chiefs and door gunners were able to get the majority of the kills. Other than rocket or 40mm kills, if it was just with machine gun fire that you could suppress an area, they were able to do it as effectively, if not more effectively, from back there than we could do it from up front.
As good as it was, however, the Huey and the gunship configuration had limitations that hampered its performance. The external weapon systems created so much drag that the aircraft usually flew slower than the scouts and slicks it was supposed to protect. Enter the Cobra. The Bell AH-1 Cobra was the first helicopter designed as a weapons platform. It had the speed that the Huey guns lacked and the armaments to do the job.
Cobra was quite a bird. I'd seen movies of it in flight school, and I was smitten, if that's the word I could use. I wanted to fly Cobras. It was the sleekest thing I'd ever seen. It was a derivative from the Huey, the UH-1, same engine, the same transmission, different rotor head arrangement, but it was a very slim, trim bird. It was a tandem seater where one man sat in front, the other sat in the back, and it was designed strictly as a weapons platform. It was not designed to haul cargo or people. It was just designed to put ammunition on a target. Well, I've heard everything about how the enemy regarded the Cobra as probably the primary target because we were the ones that could really inflict the most pain. You know, of course they would shoot at any helicopter as a target of opportunity, but the real test was to get the Cobra, because, you know, we were the gunships. I mean, there were other gunships. There were the B model Hueys and then the Charlie models that flew slowly. They flew lower. As compared to what the Cobra could carry, they had a limited amount of load, so we could carry more. And we tended to fly higher, a little higher than the Charlie models, but we were more effective, I think. We were far more, our platform was more stable for firing, so we could pinpoint our target, our accuracy better, the more accurate delivery than the Charlie model, I believe. I mean, that war has raged on about who was the best gunship, but to my way of thinking, the Cobra was the best.
About the same time the Cobra appeared, the fragile OH-13s were replaced by the OH-6 Cayuse Loach for light observation helicopter.
And we had the OH-6 Cayuse, which was a scout helicopter made by Hughes Aircraft, which we started out using a crew of 3, 2 pilots and a scout, but for weight and other reasons it was eventually reduced to a scout gunner and a pilot.
Together, the new choppers greatly enhanced the capabilities of the Scout gunship team. With the Scout gunship teams putting the finishing touches on prepping the LZ, the stage was set for the arrival of the main body of the air assault, the Slicks with their load of combat troops. The standard technique was to land in trail formation, or single file. It was important to spend as little time on the ground as possible, usually 30 to 60 seconds per ship. Huey Slick ships, often the same ones that had inserted the troops, ferried in ammunition and food and supplemented the medevac ships in evacuating the wounded. The speed and carrying capacity of the Huey gave it a versatility that lent itself to almost any application.
We did combat insertions, combat assaults. We did combat extractions. People got into trouble, we could go pull them out. We inserted LRPs, long-range reconnaissance patrols. Evacuated wounded when called upon. That was always a primary mission. And what we called ash and trash. We took the mail. We took hot chow if it was available. Just anything we had to do, you know. Combat assaults. You were busy putting troops in, resupplying them, getting them set up for however long they may stay. Ash and trash missions were just basically what a commercial pilot will do today. He'll go here, he'll go there, and just do whatever they need to be done.
The Huey crew of 4 was a close-knit team. In the front seats were the 2 pilots, the aircraft commander and the co-pilot. Usually called the Peter pilot, the man in the right-hand seat was typically a warrant officer or a lieutenant fresh from flight school. After an in-country orientation, the new pilots joined their units and found out that all of their training had just been a warm-up to developing real flying skills.
The aircraft commander, who was so designated at the time, was the experienced guy who had quite a few hours, and he had been promoted from being just the pilot. He was no longer just some new guy who really doesn't know how to fly. And of course, we graduated from flight school with over 200 hours of flight time. So we knew how to fly, but we really didn't know how to fly. And there was a big difference between the two. Once we got to Vietnam, we learned how to really fly. And when they felt that we were experienced enough, when we were starting to pick up the little things that were necessary to stay alive, then they would discuss whether we were capable of becoming aircraft commanders. And normally within my unit, we would have to fly with all the different aircraft commanders. And they would say, yes, he's good enough. Or they would say, no, you know, he's not quite good enough on something, landings or whatever. And the person would remain pilot for a while. But once the guy became aircraft commander, he sat in the left seat, and he was pretty much in charge. Now, in 70, I believe, they caused it to switch over. The aircraft commander was no longer. He was now the pilot in command. And the other guy was the pilot. And the designation between the two changed considerably.
This extensive training was necessary because of the incredibly difficult conditions and the danger that came with the job. And after all the training was completed, there was the best school of all, flying, and lots of it.
One thing about flying a helicopter in Vietnam is that you had a lot of opportunity to gain a skill level, really hone your skills that that you probably couldn't do in a stateside environment. I mean, you were probably flying 6 to 7 days a week, anywhere from 4 to 16 hours a day. And you reach an incredible edge, you know, because you're so involved in it that the helicopter does become an extension of your body. And even if you lay off flying, I could remember if I went on an R&R, which is, you know, going to one of the areas that you had an opportunity to relax a little bit. Just being gone 3 days, you lost your edge. You came back and you just weren't as precise or as good as you were when you left. And it took a couple of days to get it back, but kind of, I guess you get to handle a helicopter about like Michael Jordan plays basketball?
When I first got in country off of a 707, we got onto some trucks after initial orientation at Benoit Air Base, and we just all knew. We had a sidearm of a 38, and we went out about 20 miles to our base camp, and we were scared to death. We were going to get shot. And then suddenly, after about the first week, you went to an in-country unit to fly with older pilots, and we couldn't distinguish a bunker on the ground. We couldn't even find the base camp when we took off. We were young and dumb, and then after about 3 months, everything gets sharpened up. You can fly in an LZ and you can spot a movement, a guy over to your left, just cut your eyes. And for about a 6-month period, you kind of feel like you're invincible. The more firepower a lot of time that would come from Charlie on the ground, the closer we would get, and you just felt like you couldn't be destroyed. And we might have done a few dumb things, but if somebody was in trouble, no matter what the firepower that Charlie had, the helicopter pilot was going in there, whether he was a slick or a gunship or what. And especially if one of your helicopters went down, no matter what unit, if somebody hurt him, they would respond, and a lot of time, 20-minute fuel warning would come on, and a guy's still there trying to get him out. And then, of course, the last 3 months, you start to thinking, well, am I going to go ahead and make it out of here after this year? And it kind of tightens up a little bit more, and usually most units about the last 30 days let a guy fly ash and trash or whatever.
The 2 men in the main bay of the aircraft were also specialists and highly skilled. The crew chief rode on the left side behind the aircraft commander, and armed with an M60 machine gun, he doubled as a door gunner.
Now, the crew chief's job was specifically to maintain that aircraft. Specifically, of the entire crew, the pilots would rotate from aircraft to aircraft, and the gunners would rotate from aircraft to aircraft. The crew chief was nominally assigned to one ship, and that was his responsibility, and maintain the logbook, be responsible for reporting to the maintenance sergeant the maintenance status of the aircraft, directing different crews that were brought down. The maintenance schedule on an aircraft is generally accepted to be an hour and a half to 2 hours of maintenance for every hour in flight. So these things are very, very capable machines, and even more so now. But in 1968 technology, they were phenomenal if you compare them to aircraft of an earlier era. And the crew chief's job was to maintain the aircraft.
Armed with an M60 machine gun, the door gunner was on the right side of the helicopter behind the co-pilot.
What we did, we just made sure that whenever we went into a hot LZ, that if we started taking fire, we would suppress their fire until we stopped taking fire. And then that was, we helped the pilots out. The gunners and the aircrew people, we were the guys that did the maintenance on the helicopters. We refueled it, the pilots flew it, and got us in and out, and we made sure that they came back with us.
A hot LZ usually meant casualties. Designed as an air ambulance, the Huey is wide enough to accommodate a litter crosswise in its cabin. When rigged for medevac, the craft can carry up to 6 litters. Although any helicopter in the area would pick up wounded, the pilots of medevac choppers made a specialty of flying into the teeth of hell to get the wounded.
The first experience that I had with medevac, I used to be stationed at the 8th Field Hospital, which was down above Cameron Bay. And I'm from Tennessee, and I grew up on Sergeant York, and Tennessee being a volunteer state. And it used to really bother me those first 8 months that I was in country, that I was at a hospital, and I went to work every day and starched and ironed fatigues, and I slept on a cot every night with clean linen. And what struck me about that would be when a helicopter would fly in there and bring guys in from the field that had been injured. And you'd have a guy that stepped on a landmine 15 minutes or 20 minutes ago. And I really felt very, very helpless and not very much of a contributor to the effort by sitting there in that hospital waiting for this guy to come in. And so I volunteered to go to the field to fly medevac because that was the only experience that I had had with combat. seeing those helicopters come in. And so, needless to say, I didn't know it, but they were looking for dummies like me that were looking to volunteer for this stuff. And so I was fortunate enough that the first cab wanted me. And so I went up there and I wanted to fly medevac. The first experience I had when I got there, I met a guy, and he was another black fellow from Nashville, and I'm from Memphis. And so we automatically had a kinship, both of us being black and both being from the South and from the same state. And he had just come back in from a mission, and he took his helmet off and he threw it on the ground, and he took his flak vest off, and I mean, this guy had almost disrobed between the helicopter and his tent, and he basically had quit. He said, I'm not flying anymore. And what had happened is that his helmet had taken a round, and he had taken some chicken wire and pushed it through it. We had these anti-ballistic helmets, and so they were designed to change the trajectory of a bullet or fragments or whatever. And he put it back on, and what he noticed was that had the bullet gone straight, it would have shot him right through the head. And he just decided that he had pressed his luck long enough. And so he said to me, he said, "You're gonna fly medevac?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "You're a damn fool." And I said, "Thank you very much." I said, "Nice to meet you."
I did one medevac one time. I was fairly new there. I think it was about my first month or so. And I was a Peter pilot at the time. And we heard a riverboat had gotten in contact, and they had some wounded. So we landed as near as we could, and they were having trouble getting to us. So the aircraft commander, the crew chief, and the gunner all left me in the aircraft by myself to go pull the wounded out. And I was sitting in the aircraft with my .38, and that was it.
So you'll see the helicopter used initially as a troop transportation device. They'll use it to assault, they'll use it to move artillery around to different hilltops and set up fire bases. It will give the American forces a mobility that has been, that is unmatched to this point in the world. And you're going to have the development of the gunship and its ability to support the combat infantrymen in close with precise and carefully applied firepower. So air mobility and this concept of moving, supporting, transporting, evacuating casualties, doing all these different things with helicopter.
For the troops on the ground, these missions were lifesavers. Every day they watched the risks taken by the pilots and crews to bring in ammunition and food, to suppress enemy fire, to evacuate the wounded, and they learned from experience that the chopper crews would not let them down. They had seen too many pilots willing to risk their lives in order to help out anyone in trouble. Pilots like Lieutenant Alan Fry, who was shot down going in for wounded. The injured Fry was soon rescued. No one would have blamed him if he would have called it a day right then. But what he did next was the kind of thing that earned helicopter pilots their reputation with the grunts.
Several of them, probably half a dozen, were in very, very bad shape. And we were told that there were maybe half a dozen that simply would not live until the morning unless they were picked up and flown to a hospital. So I flew back in there at night to pick them up and took them back to a hospital in very bad weather. And I got 8 of them out of there, as a matter of fact. And I have never forgotten that when I landed at the field hospital, I was just sitting there as they were unloaded. I'd called ahead, and of course the medical facilities were completely prepared to take care of these people when I landed. But I've never forgotten when I was sitting there as they were being unloaded, and I felt someone pulling on my sleeve, and I turned around and looked down. We had the light on inside the helicopter then. And one of these guys who was laying on the floor had reached up and was pulling on my sleeve. And he was trying to say thank you. I couldn't hear him, but I could see his mouth moving, saying thank you. And I've never forgotten that.
With heroism like this an everyday occurrence, it's no wonder the ground troops respected the helicopter crews.
Our infantry got pinned down as they were moving through this town. Not uncommon. House-to-house fighting is tons of fun. I don't care what war you're in. And they said that this one house was giving them trouble. And I said sorry, one house is one house, you know. And they said, well, we can mark it. I said, that's a great idea. And so they had managed to get close enough to it that they could mark it with a grenade. And we said, no, you know, house immediately to the north. Yes, that's the one. So I went in, and as I put in that story, shot a set of rockets and surgically removed the roof, okay? And my wingman said, thank you very much. And the next thing he surgically removed was the North Vietnamese machine gun position in the house. And the infantry was yelling and screaming on the radio. So I felt that I did a good job, and then I was able to work as a good team. Our infantry, the air people that were flying, and even to help the Marines when they came out. That made me pretty gratified. One of the things that they did in that town when they moved into it is they blew up like what would be the equivalent of an orphanage, and they killed about 20 or 30 people. We did not know that at that time. You know, maybe the North Vietnamese or the Viet Cong that blew that up, maybe that was an accident, maybe, okay? But we learned two or 3 days later, again, that they had done this thing. And so it was kind of gratifying for us that said, you know, why would an armed unit of any side blow up somebody that was not part of the combat operation? Just to be nasty, just to be vindictive, just to be whatever. And yet we pounded them, so we felt pretty gratified on that.
Among themselves, the flyers enjoyed a camaraderie as strong as brotherhood.
There was one particular mission, a good friend of mine, aircrew, flying a Scout, gets shot down at supporting Firebase Ripcord, actually Firebase O'Reilly, right in that area. It was a bad time in the summer of '70. And he went down within 5 minutes. I was able to get in there and pick him up and bring him back home. So I think the fact that we all flew together, worked together, we're a family together, we took care of each other very well, and that always paid big dividends. And everybody knew, everybody had the confidence that if we went down, there was going to be somebody, our wingman or somebody was going to go take care of us.
Well, I know that morale was high when I was there in '66 and '67. I don't know how it was later, but they were. And most helicopter pilots, if they knew somebody was in and could hear them, or they would go try to do something about it if they were in trouble. Let's put it that way. I was getting my words mixed here. But if they found out there was they were having a problem and in their area, they try to go help them. Oh, I tell you what, as old as I was the oldest combat helicopter pilot in Vietnam when I was there. Now, we had some other pilots, helicopter pilots as old as I was, but they were in staff jobs in high positions and they only flew a little bit. I'll tell you what, they missed flying with some fine young men.
The mutual trust between pilots was based on confidence in one another's abilities. To stand out among this group, a man had to be head and shoulders above the rest. Still, there were men who were legends in their own time. One of these men was Ace Casalio, a gunship team leader in D Troop, 3rd of the 5th Air Cav, who was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross.
Ace Casalio was probably as close to a warrior god as there ever was. He was a legend. Ace came to meet me, and he was wearing an 1850s cavalry uniform. I mean, the hat, the scarf, the boots, the old uniform, the saber. He had a silver star and a purple heart on his chest and a bandage on his neck that was still bleeding, and he walked into the room and he said, "I'm here for my men," and my heart just went right here. I went, oh no, what have I gotten myself into? But he set the standard. He set the standard for all of us. He taught us how to be cavalry. A company or a platoon of grunts had stopped and they were getting fire. They were taking fire from one particular tree line, and they got the company commander, and then they got the radio operator, and they were just picking them off one at a time. And Ace, we were called in, and Ace went over the area and just decimated the bad guys. And I guess about half the platoon was either dead or wounded. And I think Ace knew that he'd got them all. And he landed his helicopter, got out, pulled his saber, rallied all of the guys that were left, and led a cavalry charge across the rice paddy to see if they'd gotten them all. And they hadn't, but they did on the way over.
Heroism and bravado were everyday acts. You saw what you had to do, and you did it. And knowing you did it, and the thanks of the men you helped, that was enough. And still, there were those who did the impossible. During the Tet Offensive in January 1968, a Huey with a battalion commander, a company commander, a battalion sergeant major, and 4 passengers was shot down over Hue. Rescue choppers made 5 attempts to evacuate the wounded. Monitoring the action on his radio, Army Warrant Officer Frederick Ferguson decided it was his turn to give it a try.
Day in question, Tet 1968, start of Tet. January the 31st, I was on a resupply mission with some engineers to the south of the Hue Phu-Bai area. During that mission, we were monitoring the radios, and we heard that an aircraft had gone down within the city of Hue. We assumed, of course, the worst, you always do. But later on in the day, as we got back up towards the Hue Phu-Bai area, we heard that there were some survivors of the crash, and that they had taken refuge in a compound inside Hue. And we also heard that other aircraft had attempted a rescue and been driven off by intense anti-aircraft fire, and that the division then put out a order to stay clear of the city of Hue because of the intense fire. I talked to my co-pilot Buck Anderson, my crew chief, and my gunner, and they agreed to go with me on an attempted rescue. We went over and I found 3 gunship crews who had gas and bullets and were willing to go with us to cover us. And so fortunately for us, the survivors had an FM radio, and we were able to communicate with them. And they told us that they were under a constant mortar attack, so we knew that they already had their tubes laid on the area, so once they figured out what we were doing, we didn't have a lot of time to get in and get out because they were going to start lobbing mortars on the place. We started in, and they called us and said, "Don't come right now, we're under a mortar attack." So we broke it off and circled outside of town for about, I guess 15 or 20 minutes. Then they said, well, the mortar attack stopped now, so we started back in again. We flew low level down to Perfume River at everything we could squeeze out of them, and gunships were doing their thing, shooting and firing rockets and machine guns, and keeping as many of them off us as they could. I think the big reason we were successful is they had 4 helicopters to shoot at instead of just 1, which gave them a division of attention and divided their fire amongst the 4 of us. And I landed in the compound, and of course, because of the radio contact, the people knew we were coming, and they were ready for us. And there were 5 survivors left, all of them wounded, and we drug them on the helicopter. And just as I started to pick up, a mortar round hit by the left rear of the helicopter, and I just kept pulling pitch, and she started coming off the ground, and there was just dust everywhere. I couldn't believe the dust. And just as I must have gotten up to about 8 or 10 feet, another mortar round went off right underneath the helicopter and spun me around. And I'm pointing in the wrong direction now, and I'm taking a lot of small arms fire and 12.7 fire. And my plan in the gunship thought I was going to go the opposite direction, but because this mortar round had spun me around, I didn't feel like making another pedal turn up there while I was getting a shit shot at me, so I just lowered the nose and headed out the other direction and called them and told them what I was doing. They recovered quite nicely. And of course, it doesn't matter because they were out of bullets at that time anyway. They had nothing to return fire with. They just were flying along with me to help draw the fire, which fortunately for me and the wounded passengers, they did a really good job of that. And we got out of town.
Daily heroism by dust-off pilots was already a legend when the Special Forces Detachment and 3 mobile strike force companies were pinned down by NVA troops near the Cambodian border.
I made what we call a nice, fast tactical approach in the helicopter, which in that area, the only thing I could do was point the nose straight down and watch to see that my rotor RPM didn't get excessive. I'm not saying that it didn't go past the red line. I said excessive in my estimation. And I landed right on top of them. At least that's what the CNC ship told me. And as soon as I did that, well, the enemy opened up on me. Remember, this was a surrounded group. I hadn't given it much thought, but when I landed over top of him, well, then I was surrounded too. And my crewman in the back, of course, hollered, hey, we're getting shot at from around the clock. There's no, this I knew. I could hear them. The problem was that this individual that I was going to pick up, when he heard all this firing, he didn't stand up. The grass was so high that the rotor wash was folding it over on top of him, so I couldn't even see him. Well, I couldn't stay there getting shot at, and I exited. And I talked with the CNC, and he said, well, I don't know what to do. If he shows himself, then we'll pick him up. But he won't because we're getting shot at down there. I said, well, try it once more. So we tried again. Same results, that's no good. So I moved about 100 yards south of where he was and set up a racetrack pattern, skimming along the ground. I did that for 2 reasons. Number one, to let those surrounded people know that here was an aircraft that could be their salvation. I'm circling there or moving in this racetrack pattern. I'm real low on the ground, sometimes skimming on it. I'm doing about 20 knots, and the reason for this for this movement is so that I'm not a constant target. Now, the enemy is there, but they can very well be shooting at me indiscriminately because they could be hitting their own people. So that is my ace in the hole. And finally, the tactic succeeded. One nervy man finally decided, well, he just might be able to pick me up, so he stood up, waved a rag or a shirt, and we noted his position and circled around, never stopped, yanked him on board. And I suppose when the others that were hiding, see what, all this time we never saw a friendly or an enemy face. All we heard was the firing. But when this first pickup proved to be successful, then more people stood up, and we did this circle, always moving, always in motion, until we got about 9 or 10 people on board. Well, by now, I've got a load. I can't very well do my job unless I do something. I took them to a special forces camp. I needed more fuel. I knew this place had fuel, so I picked up some fuel, went back, repeated the same tactics, circling in this racetrack pattern. Same results, 9 or 10. Went back to Makwa, dropped them off, picked up some more fuel again now. You might say, well, boy, you ran out of fuel real fast. Well, the reason is that I didn't have a full load. I just got a little bit of fuel because I wanted to stay light so I'm maneuverable. and we proceeded to make a 3rd series of pickups. Now, all this, it might sound like that's pretty nice and easy, but it took 2.5 hours. Again, when we have close to 9 or 10 on board, at that point I said, well, it's getting dark. Is there anybody that you see? And my crewman in the back, one of them, either my medic or my crew chief, said, there's one standing up waving his shirt, and he's real close to the bunker position where we'd been getting fire from. I said, oh, well, I got to do something. And I made a statement which was almost prophetic. I said, we'll get him, but he'll be the last one. Well, damn near was the last one for me. Because the enemy had been using that spot to fire on us in the past, I went and hovered backwards with my tail towards the man. And the reason was if they opened up, then their projectiles would have to go through the tail cone through the fuel cell before they came up front to the cockpit compartment, and told the people in the back what I was going to do. They didn't object. I don't know why, but they didn't, and it worked. They never opened up at me from that position like I expected to. When the medic in the back or the crewman in the back yelled to me, "I have him, let's get the hell out of here," I did, and as I rotated to forward speed, that's when the enemy had me set up. They had placed a machine gunner, and he watched me back up past him until I stopped, and that's when he unloaded his AK at me, and he was only about 30 yards away. So this is where the intelligent and the bright American is outfoxed by the illiterate Viet Cong. You know? I got to give him credit. He was no doubt scared. I know that he was never that close to a helicopter. And this poor bastard, with orders, I'm sure, get that damn American, he's been here too long, you know. And he did his best, because he emptied out that whole clip at me. And he was firing at me personally. And for some reason, the bullets seemed to stray as they hit the glass. I had 3 bullets that impacted on both sides of me, hitting the armor plate, which is supposed to protect me from the other side. They hit inside the armor and bounced down on the floor. I was hit, though. My hand was hit, caused me to move my stick back rather rapidly. A bullet glanced off my foot, off my sole, and that caused one of the pedals to be jammed in. And we were temporarily out of control. Of course, the co-pilot, he right away was on the controls with me, because all this happened at one time. I said, "Damn it, I'm hit." And he grabbed or tried to help me out. I could see that we were in this unusual position where the nose is up in the air, and the aircraft wants to climb, but it needs more power to sustain itself. So my good arm, I'm pulling up on the power to keep it there, and we finally settled down. The man that was being pulled in now has slid off, but luckily his feet straddle the skid. So the medic is able to hold on to him. And by the time he pulls him on board after we get settled, well, we were about 60 feet in the air. So anyhow, we saved him, brought him, and we returned again to Muckwall. And I got to tell you the side story here. The co-pilot asked me, he says, "Is every day like today?" See? And I said, "Well, not exactly, you know." But the reason he asked me that story, that was his first mission with me.
Experiences like these illustrate the intensity of combat that duty in the States, back in the world, doesn't afford. For some of the men returning from Vietnam, the return was especially painful. With the memories of comrades in arms left on the fields of battle fresh in their minds, they found no hero's welcome at home, only indifference and disdain.
I was very proud of what I did. I mean, it was my glory year. I was very proud of it. And I found it difficult. I think what a lot of guys went through, and me too, was once we came back home, this wasn't our glory anymore. We couldn't proudly walk down the street and announce the fact that we had been to Vietnam. We flew helicopters, we flew gunships, because there was always that person that was ready to call you the baby killer. That person that was ready to philosophize and tell you how wrong the war was and how we had no business being there. And, you know, you didn't want to get involved with that, you know? And I mean, I felt like every war, you know, they all had their heroes, you know, and I wanted to be one of them. This was our war. The Vietnam War was our war. I mean, like it or not, they trained me to go, and really it was a voluntary thing. I wanted to do it. And I just thought that when I came back home, that somebody would pat me on the back and say, you know, job well done. And I didn't get any of that. I got just the opposite.
The pilots did come home with honor, Most of the men went on to other assignments or resumed civilian life and started rewarding careers. For others, Vietnam remained a very real presence in their minds, and for them, the war of the memory is still being fought.
I don't think it'll ever be over. As far as the fighting, that part's over, but as far as the memories, that'll never be over. Those things will always be with me. And it's not too hard to talk about it. As long as you're talking to somebody that experienced that, I think it's more comfortable to do that. But the generation now, like the 20-year-olds that don't have any recollection of that war, to them, I don't like to talk to them about it. And my kids, when they were in high school, they would approach me a couple of times about going into the classroom and talking about it. And I just didn't feel comfortable about doing that because it's something that's it's really dear to me, and it's something that I wouldn't want to express to somebody that really doesn't appreciate it or know exactly what we went through over there.
I don't look at Vietnam as being a terrible part of my life. And it is over. It was over after I came home after my second tour there. I can't say that it's over for one reason, and that is because I have friends who are still listed as MIA POWs. I have students that I train who are still listed MIA POW. So I think until I get a full accounting, until I know for sure that they were killed, we do have their remains back, it will always be a point that I definitely remember, that I definitely say, yes, there still is a Vietnam conflict. And the conflict perhaps is only with me.
I'm not sure that my war's still going on, but it's good memories. I mean, that had to be the most rewarding year of my life. Not because I was flying gunships or anything, but because I wasn't, but it was just a matter of helping the American GI. I keep having to go back to that. I was so impressed with the resilience, the loyalty. I mean, they were great guys.
As you're aware, politically it's a very unpopular war. However, the American military never lost one single major battle, not one. Even Tet 68, which was played by the news media as being a major defeat for the United States, was not a defeat at all. In fact, one of the safest periods in Vietnam was about 2 months after Tet 68. We so annihilated the Viet Cong and a lot of the NVA that you could drive in a car on a lot of the highways in South Vietnam that you could not do before and after Tet 1968. It really was a turning point. In fact, there's a lot of statistics that are available now that say that, I'm not sure about the actual numbers now, but over 3/4 of the Vietnam veterans who served in Vietnam, when asked if they would do the same thing again, even knowing the outcome, the answer is yes. Most Vietnam veterans are very proud of the service that we had in Vietnam, and unlike the typical thing that you see in the news media about the Vietnam veteran being a crazed drug addict and having problems with post-traumatic stress syndrome and all these things, it's a very small minority. Most of us are normal, well-adjusted people who live every day and contribute to society. In fact, I think you're beginning to see that Vietnam veterans have a very strong network. We can get a lot of things done now that others can't do because of that brotherhood and network that we've put together.
These men and all the thousands like them, daring, young, and above all, incredibly skilled, have written themselves into history. Their accomplishments demonstrated beyond any doubt the potential of the helicopter in combat. For this and for devotion to duty and honor, for lives saved, for faith kept with comrades in arms, for all this, they have covered themselves in glory. There will be war and rumors of war, and there will be a place for men like these, heroes in helicopters.